Macroeconomic policy around the world. Here's the question worth thinking about. Why can a young person in one country finish school and quickly find a good-paying job, while someone with similar abilities in another country may search for work for months or even years? Why do some countries enjoy high incomes and relatively stable prices, while others struggle with poverty, unemployment, or extremely high inflation? Around the world, governments face many of the same economic goals: economic growth, low unemployment, stable prices, and sustainable international trade. Yet countries begin from very different circumstances. Some have highly educated workforces, advanced technology, and strong financial systems. Others struggle with political instability, limited infrastructure, weak educational systems, or underdeveloped labor markets. Understanding these differences helps explain why the same economic policy will not necessarily work everywhere. That's what this video is about: how economies around the world differ and what governments can actually do about it. Setting the stage. Start with just how uneven the world economy really is. The World Bank sorts countries by gross national income per person. At the bottom are low-income countries, where people live on about $1,000 a year or less. There are 27 of them. At the top are 80 high-income countries. Everyone else, about 110 nations, sits in the middle. Now here's the part that should stop you. The middle-income countries hold roughly 75% of the world's population, but produce only about a third of its income. High-income countries flip that ratio completely. Under 16% of the world's people, 63% of its income. And North America plus the European Union, with barely 10% of global population, produce and consume around 44% of global GDP. One caution before we go further: total size can fool you. China is the world's second largest economy, but divide its GDP by 1.4 billion people, and you get a per-person figure of about $6,900. That's far below Japan at $38,500 or the United States at $52,800. This is why economists focus on GDP per capita rather than raw GDP. The goal isn't just a bigger economy, it's a better standard of living for the individual person in it. Why the gap between nations? Productivity mostly. Physical capital, human capital, and technology, all working inside each country's particular mix of institutions, history, geography, and politics. Some countries have coastlines and trade routes, others are landlocked. Some are at peace, some are not. But here's the common thread: every country, rich or poor, chases the same four macroeconomic goals: economic growth, low unemployment, low inflation, and a sustainable balance of trade. The goals don't change. The starting points do, and that means the policies have to change with them. Let's take those four goals one at a time. Main points. 4 goals, different playbooks. First, growth. For high-income countries like the United States, Japan, and the nations of Western Europe, growth means staying on the technological frontier, an educated workforce, steady investment, stable prices. Japan is a useful case. In 2012, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe launched a plan mixing fiscal stimulus with an expanded money supply. The results were mixed. Growth stayed near 1%, inflation barely stayed positive, but unemployment fell to just 2.5% by early 2020. The middle-income success stories are the East Asian tigers: South Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, averaging around 5.5% real growth per person for decades. China and India followed. How? They saved heavily, often a third of GDP or more. They invested hard in schools, especially math and science. They went looking for technology abroad, and they let market forces breathe. A quick way to grasp what those numbers mean is the rule of 72. Divide 72 by the growth rate, and you get the doubling time. A tiger growing at 6% doubles its income every 12 years. A leader growing at 2% needs 36. For low-income countries, many in sub-Saharan Africa, the trap is brutal in its simplicity. When you live on less than $100 a month, everything goes to food and necessities. No saving means no capital, and no capital means no way out. In Burundi, the average person lives on $239 a year. Half of children attend school, and only 11% of households have electricity. Second, unemployment. Rich countries face two kinds. Cyclical unemployment comes from recessions, and the fix is expansionary monetary and fiscal policy. Though recovery is slow, hiring can lag a year or two after a recession officially ends. The natural rate is trickier. because it comes from the rules of the labor market itself. France has 2.4 times as many companies with 49 employees as with 50. Why? At 50 workers, French law requires worker councils, profit sharing, and restructuring plans. So companies simply stop growing at 49. In poorer countries, the real problem isn't unemployment as we measure it. Millions farm, fish, barter, and string together day jobs. They aren't unemployed, but they aren't connected to a wage-paying labor market either. And research says that connection is one of the strongest paths out of deep poverty. Economist Sir W. Arthur Lewis explained why. On crowded farmland, one more worker adds almost nothing to the harvest. Move that same worker into a young manufacturing sector, and their output jumps. That's the migration story behind China's factory towns, and it lifts wages once the surplus farm labor gets absorbed. Third, inflation. High-income countries have largely solved this one. Central banks can hold inflation down over the medium and long term, and there's political consensus to do it. Elsewhere, not so much. Zimbabwe's inflation hit several million% in 2008. Venezuela reached 1 million% by 2018 after printing money to cover its deficits. Too much money chasing too few goods. Fourth, the balance of trade. This one deserves a closer look. So let's give it the next section. A deeper look. When money rushes in, then out. Global trade has clearly paid off. Japan, the Tigers, China, India, all of them grew by selling to the world. And history offers no example of a small economy that stayed apart from global trade and still got rich. But open economies carry a specific risk, and the East Asian crisis of 1997 and 1998 shows exactly how it plays out. The Tigers had earned stellar reputations, so foreign money poured in. Banks borrowed in US dollars, lent in local currency, and expanded lending by 20% a year or more. Growing that fast, they got sloppy about who they lent to. When 10 to 15% of loans started going bad, foreign investors panicked and pulled out. Exchange rates crashed, some falling by half within months. And that crash sprang the trap. The banks owed dollars but held local currency. Even if every domestic loan had been repaid, they couldn't cover their dollar debts. The banking sector went under, credit vanished, and deep recession followed. Ireland, Iceland, and Greece later lived through their own versions of the same story. In 2020, Spain and South Africa had nearly identical youth unemployment, but for opposite reasons. Spain's problem was cyclical, and its hands were tied. Borrowing was too expensive for fiscal stimulus, and sharing the euro meant no independent monetary policy. South Africa's problem was structural, what economists call an employability problem. Its young people test well academically, but lack workplace skills, so the government began paying unemployed youth to apprentice inside firms. Same statistic, different disease, different cure. That's the central lesson of comparative macroeconomics. One more thread, foreign aid. About $134 billion flows yearly from rich countries to poor ones. Economists like Dambisa Moyo and William Easterly argue it often feeds corruption and crowds out better investment. The emerging middle ground is that aid works modestly when aimed at specific long-term projects, but it's no substitute for stable, market-oriented institutions. Wrapping up. So what should stay with you? The world economy is dramatically uneven. High-income countries hold most of the income with a small share of the people, and most of humanity lives in the middle-income tier. Every nation wants the same four things: growth, low unemployment, low inflation, and sustainable trade. But the right policy depends entirely on the starting point. Rich countries push technology. Middle-income countries build savings, schools, and market incentives. Low-income countries fight to escape a poverty trap where nothing can be set aside for tomorrow. Unemployment needs a diagnosis before a prescription. Cyclical joblessness responds to stimulus. Structural joblessness requires fixing the rules or the skills. Inflation is a solved problem where central banks are strong, and a runaway one where governments print money to cover deficits. And openness to trade builds prosperity, but fast-moving foreign capital can wreck even a star economy when it flees. Two countries can share the same unemployment number and need completely different medicine. Reading the difference is what economics is for. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We've got more videos coming that will help you build a solid foundation in economics, one concept at a time. I'll see you in the next Learning Star video.